Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Kevin Tulloch Marston, and it's my pleasure as president of the Society for American Soccer History, also known as SASH, to welcome you to our June 2024 First Friday session. Founded in 1993, SASH works to promote, facilitate, and disseminate research into the rich history and heritage of soccer in the United States. You can find us best in two places: on the web at ussoccerhistory.org and on our social media with Facebook and Twitter/X accounts. You can follow First Friday sessions at hashtag FFSS, and feel free to post about them, and Dan Creel will retweet from our SASH account. A reminder that the SASH website, maintained by Ed Farnsworth, has a wonderful list of resources, including the recent digitization of the Bill Graham guides for anyone who has not yet seen those. And Brian Klostott has turned our SASH sessions into podcasts. So thank you to all our amazing volunteer membership for managing this. This will probably be our last First Friday session before the summer break. While we do have some ideas on tap for the rest of the year, there's always space. So if you have been working on something and would like to present at a future SASH session on a First Friday, then please do reach out to the SASH board. All ideas are welcome from both current members and future members alike. If a shorter format would interest you to float some ideas that maybe you're not ready to present over a 20-minute format, then we can also organize some shorter sessions with several speakers. If, rather than speaking, writing is more your thing, then we also welcome written contributions for the SASH website on all areas of soccer-related history. In this vein, we're planning to organize some online research and writing groups for any members wishing to find a community in what can often be a very solitary activity. So reach out to us if you have any questions. And if you're not yet a member, then you can join SASH through our website. We welcome new members with open arms and friendly feet. Please visit our website and click on the Join SASH tab, and you'll be eligible to receive our newsletter, so ably put together by Brian Bunk. So thank you to all our members for their interest and support, as SASH is its membership. So I'd like to welcome our speaker today and former SASH president, Tom McCabe. Dr. McCabe teaches at Notre Dame London Global Gateway, but has also taught at Rutgers University and St. Benedict's Prep in Newark, New Jersey. He's currently working on the history of the American Football Association and has also produced 2 documentaries. But today he will be speaking about another key figure in American soccer history, Thomas Bullets Cahill. So Tom, welcome, thank you, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate being able to share some of my research. This was a rabbit hole that I went down during the course of my AFA project. So I'll start with a quote from Hua Su. "The first generation thinks about survival. The ones that follow tell the stories." It was not a happy home. Mary and Tom Cahill quarreled frequently. Got even worse when the couple and their 2 daughters moved in with Mary's parents. The happiness of the home was further dissipated by this arrangement, noted the St. Louis Post-Dispatch on June 14th, 1900. Mary's father told her to divorce her fiery and combative husband. Tom duly packed his belongings and left, only to return a few days later. He came back to change her mind. When Tom set foot in the house again, Mary's father pulled a gun. Tom lunged at him and tried to pry it away. Multiple shots rang out. Hit in the stomach, Tom fought for his life. He broke 2 of his father-in-law's ribs before collapsing on the floor, unconscious. Mary watched it all from a doorway. An ambulance rushed both men to City Hospital. Tom had lost so much blood that it was feared that he wouldn't make it. The driving force behind the formation of the United States Soccer Football Association in 1913 and the manager of the USA's first international matches in 1916, Thomas William Cahill, has been called the father of soccer in the United States. Decades before this obituary was written, though, he was called something else, the war eagle of the soccer world. He made, as the newspaper noted, all the lesser birds seek cover when his battle scream sounded. Before that, and now we know the reason why, he was called Bullets. By June 1900, Tom had lost his way. He no longer had a job, his marriage was in shambles, tricky operation just saved his life. But Cahill did more than just survive. He reinvented himself, a very American thing. Understanding Tom Cahill's upbringing and early childhood can lead to a reappraisal of his role as a founding father, as well as a more complex and complete understanding of early American soccer. 25 miles outside of St. Louis, Southern Illinois University houses the Hap Meyer soccer collection. Many of us have been in it. Cahill's scrapbooks are held there, but stories about the shooting are not among the clippings. In fact, there is little on his life before 1900. It's as if these years have been erased. Others before me, including David Vangeren in his excellent chapter on Cahill and Distant Corners, have had trouble piecing together basic information. Tom's birth certificate has yet to turn up, but a passport application and a death certificate offer some vital information. His father, William Thomas Cahill, came to the U.S. in 1850 and died in St. Louis in 1890. On June 8, 1850, according to a ship's manifest, an 11-year-old boy with that name arrived in New York City. Traveling with Mary Cahill and two other boys, they had likely fled Ireland due to the famine. Then they disappeared among the masses in the Big Apple. William married at some point, and on Christmas Eve in 1863, there was the gift of a child, Thomas William. The Cahill family lived in Morsiana, Bronx neighborhood of residences, rail yards, and factories, but moved when Tom was 6 years old, settling in the Kerry Patch, St. Louis neighborhood named for its Irish immigrants. And I quote, violent, dangerous, and impoverished, end quote. The Patch was a place where clerics and publicans, cops and gangsters battled for power. Tom's father was a saloon keeper. His mother ran a boarding house. The family was a rung or two up from the struggling poor because they had a horse and buggy. One day there was an accident, and I quote, Mrs. Cahill was driving yesterday when her horse became frightened and ran away, throwing her and her son, Thomas, out of the buggy, but not injuring them, end quote. 13 at the time, accounts suggest Tom went on to study, play baseball, and run track at St. Louis University, a Catholic secondary school and college founded by the Jesuits in 1818. In 1884, on the day after his 21st birthday, Tom witnessed a match between St. Louis Thistle and the Western Football Association of Canada. He later confessed, when I saw that day, fascinated me, so that I haven't been able to give up the sport since. He was thrown from a horse as a boy, but this was his on the road to Damascus moment. Tom would go on to be driven by his mission to spread the gospel of soccer. Before that work, though, he ran track for the Missouri Athletic Club, winning the 5-mile Western Championship in 1887. Two pictures of Cahill have survived from this era. The first in a track singlet with medals pinned to his chest. Kurt Rausch found this in the bowels of the Newark Public Library. And the second as a member of the Pastimes Athletic Football Club. And that was found by Chuck Carlson, but it's also in the Hap Meyer collection. Tom is number 1. Trim and athletic looking, Tom had short, dark hair and a full mustache. He possessed the speed and stamina to run the field, but mostly played goalkeeper due to his late start in the game and lack of skill. Tom had been working for the railroad during this period of his life, first as a clerk, then as a switchman, and finally as a conductor. But it was clear that he had more passion for sport. In 1888, the Missouri Athletic Club denied him entry to a Thanksgiving race. This so incensed Tom that he laid in wait for Mac's president and, quote, pummeled him when he caught him, not giving him any warning whatsoever, end quote. He appeared in court to face assault charges and ended up paying a large fine. Little over a year later, he was in trouble again. Tom offered money to 3 players to not turn up for his own club, weakening it because he intended to place a big bet on the outcome. He denied the bribery charges and filed a countersuit for spreading libel. But Tom was a hothead, as these clippings attest. His aggression, pugnacity, and antisocial behavior were products of his Kerry Patch upbringing. That neighborhood prized bravado, violence, and scheming. And Tom no doubt observed lively, combative characters in his father's saloon and his mother's boarding house. When newspapers profiled him later in life, he rarely talked about those years. There were some obvious reasons why he hid his past. Cahill's parents had marital problems and divorced around the time of Tom's assault and bribery charges. When a heat wave hit St. Louis in 1890, his father lived in a boarding house and someone found him dead from heat stroke. His body was sent to the city morgue and his burial took place at the Missouri crematory. There is evidence that his mother remarried. As it often does in life, the ball rolled on and Tom next joined the Shamrocks, a club he owned, managed, and tended gold for in the 1890s. He once said, "Soccer in St. Louis is largely an Irishman's game," and that was certainly true for the Shamrocks and a team from St. Teresa Catholic Church, a national parish where every activity of life could be carried out within a distinctly Catholic environment. One's parish boundaries could say a lot about a person's neighborhood, ethnicity, and worldview. St. Teresa was an Irish parish that staked out religious and cultural space along Grand Avenue. But there were also Italian, German, and Polish parishes, not to mention Protestant congregations and Jewish synagogues. It was at St. Teresa where Tom married a Kerry Patch girl. Mary Casey grew up in the Patch and later moved to a neighborhood around St. Teresa, where they wedded on June 7, 1893. Within 3 years, 2 daughters arrived, but Tom's work and sport often kept him from home. He spent weeks away as a train conductor, but also, quote, worked night and day to put a first-class team in the field, end quote. Described as a great hustler, he sought any advantage to win and make a fair-sized profit. By late 1899, Cahill had to sell the club and its assets. He no longer could devote the time and money to make it a success, partly because his marriage was on the brink of collapse. Then he was shot by his father-in-law. When Tom finally walked out of the hospital, he did so a new man with a new perspective on life. Tom and Mary lived apart, but their paths crossed in civil court during a custody battle in 1902. Mary's woes continued as her father and brother died in consecutive years. But at some point, the couple reunited. In 1902, A.G. Spalding and Brothers opened up a St. Louis branch, and it was at the sporting goods company that Cahill reinvented himself. In 1905, and then again in 1909, he helped promote an overseas tour of Pilgrims FC, a Sheffield-based amateur gentleman's side led by Fred Milnes, the son of a steel magnate. The Pilgrims tour lost money due to low attendance and high expenses. The Pilgrims ate and drank their way across the country. Tom had to settle those debts. Quote, importing a British soccer 11 wasn't a shortcut to wealth, end quote, the profit-conscious Cahill lamented, but it did bring attention, and his employer took note. Spalding promoted Cahill to a prominent business position a few months after the Pilgrims tour. And in the 3 years that followed, he helped form the United States Soccer Federation. This is the guy that I really want to know. This is from 1916. He's here about to head out to Scandinavia, cigar in hand. In typical style, the War Eagle brought the fight, this time to the officials of the American Football Association, the organization formed in 1884 and sponsors of the AFA Cup. One observer described his move as one that saw him, quote, carry the banner of organized soccer into the enemy camp in the East, end quote. Tom's brashness could be off-putting. As an Irish Catholic Midwesterner with roots in the Kerry Patch, he was an outsider among the many British and Protestant immigrants who led the AFA. By 1912, Tom joined forces with a group of New Yorkers, and they rebranded the New York State Football Association into the American Amateur Football Association. Both the AFA and the AAFA waged a 2-year battle to be recognized by FIFA. Tom's side won when the world governing body accepted the AAFA provisionally. The body rebranded to become the United States Football Association, now U.S. Soccer. Cahill became its first secretary, a post he kept for nearly a decade before leaving to form the first major professional league in the country. One of his crowning achievements was managing the U.S. men's national team on a trip to Scandinavia in 1916. That team is pictured here in Kearney before they leave for Europe. He hoped to take the U.S. to the Olympic Games, but he had been deposed in the months before the 1924 Olympics in Paris. In 1909, and then we all know of other, episodes and incidents of Tom's combativeness, with others. There's a saga in 1922 where he's back and forth with Frederick Wall of the Football Association of England, sometimes in the press. So I hope that his early upbringing impresses upon us all of this fighting spirit, fighting Tom Cahill, the War Eagle, and so on. In 1909, Tom Cahill joked with a reporter that a memorial should be dedicated to him for his work on behalf of the game. He said the inscription would read, "Here lies Tommy Cahill of St. Louis. He always pulled for soccer." He left St. Louis in 1910, and while he did return on occasion, he is buried in the Gate of Heaven Cemetery in New Jersey, only a few miles away from my parents' house. Tom Bullets Cahill weathered many a fight, including a near-fatal one with his father-in-law. That incident, as well as his upbringing in the Kerry Patch, hopefully shed new light on a founding father of American soccer. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so very much, Tom. That was outstanding. And I think you don't have any issues on your 20 minutes because
I got 14:33 there, so I'm good. Thank you. I might even add a little bit.
So I would love to open up the floor for any questions from anyone listening in this afternoon, this morning. Please, if you do have a question, raise your hand as David has just done, and then make sure that you remember to unmute your microphone. So if I see David and then Gabe, and we'll start from there.
Hi, Tom. Thanks so much. Thanks for sharing this, and it's absolutely fascinating. And I wish you had 2 hours because I know you could easily fill that. So I suppose the first question I have really relates to that transition from Yonkers to St. Louis, and I just kind of missed a little bit your sentence where you transitioned on that road to Damascus moment. I wondered if you could elaborate on that just a little bit, because maybe
Sure.
I've been mistaken of late. I mean, again, so much coming. I've learned so much about Cahill from you over the years as it is. And he's such a fascinating enigmatic figure, and you do such a great job of kind of exploring the real human dimensions of this person, right? I think I mistakenly thought that maybe he'd learned a bit of football from that real thriving New York scene in particular. Yonkers had the Hollywood Inn and different teams like that when he still would have been, possibly a little, street urchin kicking a ball around with others, right? But maybe with your road to Damascus moment, that's wrong, and maybe he really picked up the game more in St. Louis. So I wonder if you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
Right. So the romantic in me wants him, in the Bronx, in the Yonkers, right? That boundary moves during this period of time, right? The late 1800s. We do know that he lived right near a horse track. Have no idea whether his father was involved in that, but this whole idea of a saloon keeper, which was kind of an aspirational post for the famine Irish, right? If you could make it to be a saloon keeper, you had made it, right? And obviously there are varying degrees of that. I recommend a book I just finished, Plentiful Country, and they're using records from the Immigrant Savings Bank on famine Irish, opening up accounts and creating wealth in that first generation. Tom would be second generation. So I like to think there's some sporting element going on. And then they arrive in St. Louis in 1871, 1872. The family shows up in a city directory, and his father is a saloon keeper. His mother is a boarding house. And there's still, I'm not 100% certain of his mother and his mother's name. I'll come back and talk a bit about the family outreach that I've had from the Cahill relatives. So he shows up in St. Louis. He's 6-7 years old, and he's living in this Irish neighborhood, the Patch, and there's all sorts of sport going on. We all know this, right? There's running, there's boxing. Interestingly, there is soccer, and it's been brought there among others by the immigrants and the Catholic Church, right? So the Catholic Church sets up Christian Brothers, College, St. Louis University, and they're bringing football from Britain with them. In contrast to American rugby or gridiron, because it's not as dangerous. And there are early stories of kids playing. I don't have an early story of Tom Cahill playing soccer. The first match he went to is that 1884 one, right? That doesn't mean he hasn't kicked a ball. He hasn't played in the sandlots. So that is a little bit of a gray area. And then, he's kind of, and I'm incriminating myself here, stuck in the goal, right? Because his feet aren't very good, even though he's really fast and he has a lot of stamina. You would think he could run the field all day, but I guess his feet aren't good enough, and they stick him in the goal. But on the road to Damascus thing, that conversion experience, I believe, is that reaction, looking back on that game, saying, man, I was caught. I was converted. I'm a missionary, from that point onward.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. Gabe, I think you were next in line.
Hey, Tom, fine presentation and eloquent as always. Thank you for additional research. Just as an FYI, the Kerry Patch is often a polite term for that part of St. Louis. It's often referred to as Dogtown. So if you run across that, don't be surprised if you haven't already. My question has to do with this fine image you have of Cahill and his track outfit. Is that the Chicago Athletic Club or the MAC, Missouri Athletic Club?
I believe this is Chicago, where he was for less than a year in 1887, right? So part of what I get into in this Cahill AFA chapter is a kind of final resolution of the amateurism and professionalism debate. And Cahill flip-flops on this all the time. So as a runner, he's setting up stakes races so he can make some money. He's a bit of a hustler, right? He's betting money on those races, trying to, win trinkets. He gets in that fight, with the MAC, and he goes, I'm going to take the medal and hawk it. I'm not even going to honor it as a prize, right? So there are newspaper accounts of him competing for the Chicago, I believe, Amateur Athletic Association. right? We know right on Grant Park there that I was in there, month ago at my daughter's graduation, the Chicago Athletic Association, wonderful building. That's now a hotel and restaurant. But yeah, he's a runner. And then he more or less, and baseball is big. He kind of cuts his teeth with another character in this chapter, Winton Barker, who is a jewelry manufacturer. And Tom works at Spalding, and right down the street is Barker's establishment. And they fund, or Barker funds, Tom manages the Pilgrims tours in 1905 and 1909. The 05 one was very successful. The 1909 one, was not as financially successful, but they're in it together. And when Tom goes east to try to infiltrate the AFA, Winton Barker is named an honorary president of the AFA. So there's evidence of outreach in the AFA trying to go national in 1910, 1911 with the St. Louis crowd, trying to bridge, that gap. I mean, St. Louis is the gateway city, right? So I make an argument, maybe tenuous, that the AFA is reaching out to try to, spread, their organization westward.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Great research.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gabe, for the question. I'm looking to see if there's anyone else who has a question in you here. Feel free also to post any questions you may have in the chat. I know David's already posted a comment in there.
I have a question for this esteemed assemblage. So, as I said, before we started recording, I'm going to present this to a room of Chuck Carlson is there, also representing SASH, but a group of folks from the UK and the continent, but mostly the UK. In that, what I have there, kind of this traumatic event that I think, is emblematic of Tom's upbringing, his combativeness, his ferocity, his mean-spiritedness. Is there anything, is my argument there? Is there anything I should tweak, considering the audience that I'm going to be, standing in front of tomorrow?
Anyone now want to have a go? I think David, I think your hand's up there as well, right?
Yeah, I think you talked about this a little bit in the aftermath, and the institutional flip-flopping that he did, and the kind of the blend of combativeness and diplomacy that seemed to be maybe sometimes at odds with each other, but he needed probably both of those, right? To navigate these nascent organizations and mutating organizations. And I think it might be useful to kind of contrast him with someone like Alcock, right? As a, somebody who had to kind of forge these different alliances from city to city to city, and to kind of situate him historically in that kind of crossroads between, the authority or hegemony of the English FA, and maybe what was going on with the SFA, and the degree to which he was aligning with one or the other, and the alignments of the organizations here, right? And
Right.
how the Pilgrims tour in some ways kind of almost brought that boil to a head, yeah?
Yes.
And then he had to be really decisive, but he wasn't so loyal to get trapped in a corner either. So I think that, kind of maybe, even if it's just a line about, you've got your Alcock for, and again, the criticism that he's faced and some of his peers have faced of late is, to me a bit rough. Whereas here, what you're doing, this isn't a hagiography, right? I mean, you're really kind of showing him warts and all, which makes him so much more fascinating. I mean, after this, I'm just that much more convinced that we need to see the film of this someday, of what segment of his life it would be or whatever. But I mean, this guy, what a character, what a character. So my suggestion is to kind of, if you've got the space, right? If you've got as much as 5.5 minutes, if you could play with a little bit of that alphabet soup. I mean, you
Right.
mentioned the rebranding of New York to the Amateur Association. Again, the way in which maybe amateurism was even amateurism versus professionalism, and then maybe Englishness and Scottishness, Protestantism, Catholicism. I thought you did a really wonderful job of teasing out the Catholicism institutionally that he kind of emerged from. But maybe they may not have any idea who Spalding was, or that, in terms of those retail outlets and how he kind of latched on to Spalding and, you
Right.
know, Spalding's propaganda with baseball and the myth of Cooperstown and stuff too, right? That Spalding's got his tentacles in there, and you got Lillywhites over there, but you got Spalding, and I don't know, the way he navigated those institutions to me just seems so incredibly fascinating. So that he couldn't just be Mr. Nice Guy; he had to be a pretty tough guy too. And Bullitt
Right.
sure was.
And I think all of us, when we read about Cahill, whether it's in a primary source or Wangerin's chapter, um, there's this kind of lingering thing. I know it was for me, like, this guy is a bit of a jerk, right? Like, he's tough, he's, you know, combative, aggressive, he wants to get his way, there's the, showdown in the 20s, with Peter Peel, and accusations of, a knife and a stabbing happening, right? Like, these are all kind of consistent things across, his life. Certainly from St. Louis, coming to New York, and David has read this chapter, and grateful for his feedback. There's also something I tease out. So Cahill comes east as an agent of Spalding. There is a very short-lived, what I call a coup, that Spalding is trying to take over the AFA. They fail. The AFA defends its turf, and those Spalding folks, who kind of came from the New York cricket world, but there was the cricket guide writer, there was a baseball guy, and then one other. There were 3 prominent employees, plus Cahill, that were all at Nassau Street in Manhattan there, and they tried to take it over, is my reading of it. It doesn't happen. Then, Cahill is now looking for others to kind of become the national governing body. And that's when he hooks up with these New Yorkers, right? So it's Nate Agar and his brother Hyman Agar. It's Thomas Bagnall. Andrew Brown factors in there. So a lot of these early players in U.S. soccer, Cahill is there. And the New York group, I see, maybe I'm reading back into this, they're not Scotch and Presbyterians, right? They're kind of others. A handful of Jewish immigrants from Sheffield, Cahill, the Irish Catholic, Midwesterner, and they're I think there's a New Jersey, New York thing going on, right? The big city versus, those across the swamps. Like, you're trying to run this thing. No, we're New York. That type of thing going on. So that period from 1910 to 13 and then beyond is fascinating to me, and I'm trying to figure it out. Somebody will come behind me and really figure it out, but I think it's very much part of that American Football Association story. And Cahill is more or less trying to kill the AFA, right? He wants the U.S. Soccer Football Association and the National Challenge Cup to be the organization and the National Cup. And he is looking to scupper. And the AFA shows some resilience. They stick around till 1924. Oddly, at the same time that Cahill is kind of coming back into the fold after his stint with the ASL.
I think also that proselytizing spirit of his, right, and the vision. I remember going to the Columbus Crew Stadium for the first time, and really feeling like I remember walking in there for the first time, and those of you that have been there, may remember it was a little bit of a, what was the toys we used to build the things with,
Legos, erector sets.
Yeah, it was kind of erector setty, but I remember the first time I walked in there thinking, man, Tom Cahill would just love this, right? And the way in which he tried to even work with baseball owners to get into the stadium, and so he's trying to get soccer into the polo grounds and the different places like that. That vision for that the sport had something more, and to me, one of the things that's fascinating about him, as opposed some of those AFA guys who were just content to cling to their hegemony, even if that meant the sport wouldn't grow. Whereas he took those risks, and in key moments, like Gabe put this in the chat there. He does so much to raise funds for the 1924 team, but doesn't get to go. But again, if it took that, it took someone with that combative nature, really getting in the trenches and fighting things out. But then, an institution he builds up, then he suddenly, he's pushed out the door, and it goes on, and then he fights back, and he comes back, and again, it just, to me, he's such a complex, fascinating figure that, you go back in history, he's one of the, he'd be on a short list of people I'd love to have a drink with, back in the time. I mean, just absolutely fascinating. But I would just, that my suggestion is for the conference, if you've got a few minutes, just a little bit of that alphabet soup, the combativeness and the institutions, and I mean, how are you going to deal with the IOC? How are you going to deal with this thing, FIFA, and what it's emerging? And, does the AFA really have a right to represent us? And and the personal troubles, maybe even with the Pilgrims thing, is just, but then the Spalding thing too, almost like a conspiracy of sporting goods, and the way in which so much stays the same,
Right.
So much stays the same as you're going to have that audience tomorrow, and a lot of them are going to be hoping to book their trips in a couple of years, and to know that we have a figure like this, such a character, that's part of our story from more than a century, right? It's just, I'm grateful that you're going to be there to represent that, and that you're going to have a lot of jaws on the floor, I'm sure.
And I'm not sure if reappraisal is the right word. It's just more color.
It is for me as a kid. As a kid buying up any soccer history books I could get, like the Hollander or whatever. I mean, so many of us used to order those things from Soccer Digest or whatever soccer shop we'd be lucky to go in the 70s. Just greedily learning as much as we could. To me, it was just like he was this saintly father figure that did so much to grow the game. And again, a talk like yours really makes him such a complex human being, right? I mean, he actually stayed married with her, right? I mean,
Oh yeah. They're the 1910s.
Fight with your father-in-law like that.
Yeah, and you people who have been into the St. Louis sources. There's a fella by the name of Ray, last name Ray, W-R-A-Y, regular columnist, and he picks up this nickname Bullets, and he's using it in the 1920s, 30s, and I believe that's where Wangerin picked up the name Tom Bullets Cahill, and he even says in his book, I'm not really sure, why he's called this. He's combative, he's fiery, he shot a gun. We don't know. His wife finally gets Ray to stop using bullets in print. She hates it for obvious reasons, right? Because it reminds her of that incident, right? In the house, and in the house it was 2 stories. There's some talk of them falling down the stairs together, and then Tom passes out. I mean, it's a real brawl, fighting for his life. And I will tell the short story of how I found it. I type in Cahill to the St. Louis newspapers on newspapers.com, and I am just going entry by entry by entry by entry. And all of a sudden, in 1900, boom, that headline that I shared with you slaps me in the face. I took my glasses off. What? I put them back, and it was incredible. I believe Kurt Rausch, who's on the call, is the first person I shared it with. I then called David and Kevin and a few others, going, you wouldn't believe this. And that was a while ago, because I went down this Cahill rabbit hole, which is, I think, bearing fruit, but definitely delaying the publication of the AFA book. But I originally thought that he didn't have much to do with the AFA. He had a lot to do with the AFA, especially, in the early 1900s, to its demise in 1924.
That's great. Does anyone else have any follow-up questions for Tom here? I know there were some other comments in the chat. Gabe, you made some comments in the chat. You picked up on that a little bit, Tom, and James as well. But does anyone else want to throw some other comments or suggestions to Tom for his presentation tomorrow? Dan, I see Dan has just posted something as well. Feel free to speak up. Maybe one thing that came to my mind, Tom, as I was listening to you at the beginning, having also kind of read a little bit of your draft chapter on this, etc. And I wondered in the opening for tomorrow, you lay it out, and then after about 2 minutes, you get into the war eagle and you get to the names. And I wonder from I don't want to say from a director script point of view, because you've done documentaries, you know that much better than I do, but would it be better to dive in immediately with bullets and the drama from the opening slide and ask sort of, where does this come from? And rather than do that two slides in or a few minutes in, I wonder if for effect, almost in terms of your delivery, that might be interesting. The other thing that came to mind with respect to tomorrow, given your UK-based audience, is something that I've always kind of wondered, and I, Gabe, I know has probably some thoughts on this as well with the St. Louis bit. Is St. Louis has always struck me as this strange anomaly in some ways, because it is this island in the middle of nowhere, disconnected in some ways and completely connected in other ways. And it's where does the game come from in St. Louis? It's brought in, as you said, by the Irish Catholic police, the Irish, and there's this Irish link. And it's brought in at the same time that if you go back across the Atlantic in 1884, you have the GA, which is invented, right? And yet there's, and you have Gaelic sports, which come into the eastern seaboard a little bit later in the 1890s, by the late 1880s. But here, St. Louis is an Irish hotbed, but it's connected to a different football and not the nationalist Irish one. And I wonder if maybe tomorrow it would be worth fleshing that out a little bit, given that you'll probably have people that will know the GA background and Irish sport and other sports with respect to that. So I thought that might be an interesting thing to tease out a bit as well. And I guess I had an open question for you with respect to the I'll come back to the Damascus moment, because I think David's comment is interesting here as well. To build on that, is when he says, in a sense, that was my moment, that match in 1884. Can you remind us on the date when he's speaking? Because I wonder to what extent is it a reconstruction, a sort of romanticized idea,
Yeah.
how I got into the game and then I became this apostle for the. Or is he simply, because the way you paint him, he's a promoter, he's an entrepreneur, he's a opportunist, and he follows where he can continue to work, and he's clearly very sharp and savvy. But is this romanticized notion of, oh yes, we fell in love with the game in 1884 because I went to it, is that just not a sort of posteriori reconstructed idea to make us all think that he loved the game from when he felt, could you flesh that out a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, really good point. He calls himself and is called an impresario in the early 1900s, right? The Trolley League, in baseball, is his first venture with Winton Barker after he gets out of the hospital, right? So it starts with baseball, and that's quite successful. They're sending semi-pro, baseball players to the big leagues. And then he brings that, kind of spirit to soccer. He says later that he considers himself a promotionalist. And I use that in air quotes for those on the airwaves. He doesn't see himself as a salesman for Spalding and company. He's promoting the game. He wants to make that clear. That article that you reference with the 1884 game and other incidents, I believe can be read as him inventing himself from the vantage point of the 1930s. I begin this chapter with a meeting under a lamppost at the intersection of 7th and Pine, which is not far from where the Gateway Arch now is in one direction, probably equidistant the other direction with the new Major League Soccer stadium in St. Louis. There's this winter meeting underneath this massive clock that Cahill walks to, Barker walks to, and they talk about their quote unquote glorious vision for soccer in the United States. And I kind of connect that meeting with the second Pilgrim's Tour, Cahill getting sent by Spalding out east. So that was fascinating. That was the first thing that hooked me, this meeting of these two guys on a St. Louis street corner trying to figure out how to make soccer a bigger game, the game of the future. There's the quote in there from one of Tom's relatives, a fellow by the name of Ed Ryan, who played soccer and ran track at the University of Pennsylvania. And Augie Bush trying to convince Tom Cahill to go in on a baseball venture. And Tom says, no, Augie, soccer is the future of sport in this country, or something like that, right? So here he's saying that, back either side of 1900. So yeah, I think he's reinventing himself with recalling that tour, that meeting, certainly the tour to Scandinavia with the U.S. national team. What I find interesting, though, is he doesn't go back to his early Kerry Patch upbringing and maybe the trauma of growing up in a broken home, a loveless marriage. I don't know. Then he has his own, issues. Yeah, it's a skeleton in the closet. And this family member, I tried to get some information off him. They have no documents. And in fact, I showed him some slides, and he was like, Tom wasn't well liked in the family. And he goes, I can't wait to bring this up over Thanksgiving dinner. So I've sent him the chapter, and I'll reach out again, and after this weekend, before hopefully finally editing this and getting it out to folks. It will be an incomplete portrait, but I think more complete than what's come before it.
Well, thank you, Tom, and it will be, even if it's incomplete, as you said, it's going to lay the groundwork for others to continue to go further, and most importantly, I think is that you're going to be able to make that link with the AFA and the book that you're writing on that, and that's a huge bridge that no one has seen before. So that's a great contribution. I see that Dan has his hand up. Dan.
Yeah, hi everybody. I just want to give a little bit of context that I've uncovered as I did a bit of a survey about St. Louis soccer leagues in like the first couple decades. Like I think Kevin said, St. Louis's kind of structure they had in the early part of the 20th century is as unique as I've kind of encountered. It was the league, they had so many teams, but it was basically 4 teams in each league, and there was a multitude of leagues, and they just kind of shook out into this way, and I'm not sure why. And they were formed around one single park. So what would happen is a group of soccer folks, men, would come together, and they would lease a park, and 4 teams would play there, and they would play double headers every weekend, and that structure continued through most of the early part of the 20th century. And Cahill was involved, as Tom obviously brought up. Cahill was involved as a manager of teams like this, and then he became usually the secretary of some of these leagues. And kind of the top level, pro / semi-pro, they usually had at the early part, like first 15 years or so, 2 kind of competing top leagues, and it was kind of a battle between these 2 top leagues. And Cahill, based on his personality and his situation in each league, was kind of a battler, and war, soccer war came up. The term came up regularly. We're at war with this league is a war with this other league. The connection, again, part of the connection there with being a baseball person was like during the St. Louis Soccer Football League. So the primary league before it became the St. Louis Soccer League that everybody kind of knows in the teens 20s, it was fully pro, kind of the quote unquote the old league, played at, I believe, Athletic Park, and they were around for half dozen years, and that was kind of the main league. And you'd see these one-off competitor leagues at Coolidge's Park. That was a baseball park run by Henry Coolidge, and every single year he owned the park, he would lease it out, and that was kind of the competitor leagues to the St. Louis Soccer Football League. And there's a connection there, obviously, between Cahill and Coolidge's Park because it's a baseball park. And at some point, this might be right before he left, he got into a fist fight with Henry Coolidge. He was secretary of the Tri-League, Cahill was at the time, and basically that season ended at Coolidge's Park. And then Cahill, I think he leaves after. I don't know if that was the reason why he left, but it happened right before that. So he leaves. The U.S. Football Association is formed. He's on the East Coast, and then in the end of the 1912-1913 St. Louis Soccer Football League season, that's when the split happens. St. Leo's bails, basically, and the next season, 13-14, the 2 of the 4 teams form one St. Louis Soccer Football League, and other 2 teams form another St. Louis Soccer League. And there's confusion. If you're reading the newspaper articles at the time, they literally use the same name for that entire season. The quote older league moves from Athletic Park to Robeson Field. The kind of outlaw quote league, the newer league, kind of moves into Athletic Park, and so they're playing and they're fighting each other. And Cahill is there as the USFA kind of representative, kind of pushing the buttons. And in like October of I've got it here in front of me. I pulled it up. So there's an article from the October 6th St. Louis newspaper. It says uh, uh, um, there was a personal feud between members of the Robeson Park League, because kind of the older league, and Secretary Thomas Cahill of the USFA. He and it's something later says Phil Kavanaugh, who's a big kind of soccer kind of impresario back then, player and manager, is actually related to Tom Cahill. So there's actually connections going on there. And there's a whole lot of like setting up the Missouri State Football Association and like dues not being paid and like all, it's a very kind of inside baseball stuff. That happens 2 seasons, 13, 14, 14, 15, and like everything, the soccer war, they basically merge and become the St. Louis Soccer League that everybody pretty much knows. Still 4 teams but fully pro. So he's there trying to impose USFA / his will on the soccer landscape of St. Louis. And if you can really read between the lines, there's probably more there that he's part of the reason why there's kind of the animosity between these two leagues, and he wants it to come out a certain way, and he's got personal relationships with these men in these leagues that are kind of causing him to kind of deal with it the way he does. So the St. Louis system is fascinating. It is just fascinating to me. And I just love to see more kind of writing about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's messy on the ground in St. Louis, and Dan, fleshes that out really well. I think that, there are anti-Cahill forces and factions in St. Louis because of prior history.
Great. Anybody else have any other open questions for Tom, or comments or thoughts? Maybe Tom, one other thing I was just wondering about, which might be of interest to various people as well, is just a question on sources. Obviously, you talked about the various sources that you mentioned, and then during your presentation, you said I'll come back to this a bit later in terms of the relative link. And so you said that obviously you found through genealogical connections, family connections, and it doesn't seem to be that there are any sources in the family. I did wonder, however, did you look at all in any of the Irish cultural institutions? Were there any Irish societies or any things like that that might potentially have additional material or things that might go beyond simply the news, the Atmeyer collection, potentially even in St. Louis? I wondered if there were any other potential leads that might be useful for you.
Right. I mean, yes. I'm not committing to it, but a biography of this guy needs to be written by someone. I reached out to Dave Lang about the St. Louis University connection, and the Catholic colleges at this time. You could have somebody as young as 10 years old all the way up to their early 20s. They were secondary schools and colleges as well, and you could leave at any various points. So is there a record of Cahill there? I wrote a history of St. Benedict's Prep in Newark, which was started in 1868. So you can find records of students in the 1870s, 1880s, and that would be interesting, to see a record there. Tom's death certificate I was able to get from the New Jersey State Archives, and heart disease in 1951, and his daughter filled it out or reported the death, and they have Amelia as the mother's first name, Lazare as the second name. There isn't an Amelia in the St. Louis records. There is an Amanda living at the same place as Tom Cahill. So that's why it's not 100% in my mind. Kurt Rausch and I have gone back and forth on this, and that's a little bit, and I make reference to it in the notes that this is an educated guess based on the available sources. I'd love to get a baptismal record through the Cahill relative. I can't do it as a non-relative. So as a Cahill relative, I've kind of shown him the path on how to get that from the church in Yonkers. There's one or two that's still around that would have been in that neighborhood. That would be another lead. This book, Plentiful Country, with this Immigrant Savings Bank, I have looked for Cahills there. That's like the needle in the haystack. Was unable to find William Cahill opening up a bank account there, because what's really cool there, it's like one of the early instances of test books. So they're, how you have to give your mother's maiden name, as a security question. They were the first ones to do it. So then you could get the maiden name. You could, get address. You could get movements from one address to the other, and then match that up against city directory. So that would have been a really good find, but not, looking like that's a match at this point. So yeah, there's more genealogical work to do. The family, could, come up aces on that. Yeah, I mean, this whole digital revolution that we are all benefiting from in terms of source material is really, something, remarkable.
I have a question. Great presentation, Tom. Fantastic. Can you talk more about the relationship between Cahill and Gus Manning?
So you have the real expert on Gus Manning here, in Kevin. Maybe it's because I've gone down this rabbit hole, really think that Cahill is the driving force, the motive force, and Manning is kind of the front of house, right? The face, the genteel cosmopolitan diplomat with connections in Germany and in England. You couldn't put Cahill up front, right? He pisses too many people off. But the urbane doctor from Manhattan with connections to the continent is a much better choice. And I think those New Yorkers, who are, morphing from the New Jersey, State Football Association into the AAFA make a wise choice in Manning. And Cahill, is behind the scenes, but he's moving everything. He's writing the letters. He's at the meetings. And Manning has a long career. But I see Cahill as the stronger will, the man with the drive, the push, the vision. Kevin could contest me on that.
No, I don't think I can contest you. I think this is where joint biography is such a great thing because, we are, at least I can speak for myself, going down my own rabbit holes, which are as interesting as they are. The danger there is to be too much in a silo. And it's been so helpful to me, obviously, to exchange with you, Tom, on this because it puts a different perspective on things. And I think how you've described the relationship, I think you're right in terms of the characters. That's you have the administrator who's the full-time guy who's dealing with promoting the game, and he has the Spalding link, and he's working full time. He's the executive, if you will, and then you have the volunteer president, who is, as you said, he's just as much an assimilated American probably as Cahill from his family background, but he doesn't have perhaps the soft diplomacy skills or contact networks that Manning has and that he's able to bring. And so it's an interesting pair. And I have to say, I've not, aside from some of the sources in the late teens, where there's that moment where Cahill steps away, Manning steps away as well 1 year, and then there's obviously tension when Andrew Brown comes in, and the early 20s is still very much a mystery to me, and it seems so chaotic and so much of competing big personalities, and I'm not sure what to make of it in terms of how the relationships are in between various people. But clearly, there are a lot of strong personalities being thrown around in that early period. And Bullets wears his name, which is funny because Manning's nickname is Little Man. At least when he's in the army in World War One, he was Little Man. So I don't think he was necessarily little. I think he's still about 5'9", 5'10" at that point. But different nickname to Bullets. No.
Right. And you mentioned Andrew Brown, who might have the most staying power of those three: Manning, Cahill, and Brown. Cahill is on a bit of a charm offensive when he shows up in Newark in 1910, and there's an episode where he goes fishing with the Brown brothers, and they collect or reel in like 300 fish, including a 30-pounder of something. And the wise guy, Jersey in me is like, man, the Browns could have offed him right there, on that fishing trip and dumped him, for chum in the water. But Brown ends up, kind of prevailing. He becomes president of U.S. Soccer, and there's a great letter in the Hapmeyer collection, and Brown is writing to Cahill about the Spalding Guide and recalling his early days as a player in the United States and how much Cahill has done for the game. So they kind of patch it up, I believe. But Brown studied for the ministry, in Scotland before he came to the U.S. And then, like a lot of these pioneers, was involved in the textile industry with Babcock and Wilcox.
That's great, excellent. Any other open points, questions, gentlemen?
I'll make a last one. Thank you for hearing me out. Thank you for folks who have read versions of this chapter. It's a work in progress, but one that will hopefully come to some conclusion in the coming months as I wrap up this AFA book project. And you don't have to have me on when that book's done. You don't need to do that.
I think we will. We definitely will have to have you on, Tom. It's such a great example of the collaborative nature of SASH and the way that everybody's research and contributions build off each other's. And I think you made that point in your presentation about Kurt and Chuck pointing you in this direction and that direction. And I think that's a testament, hopefully, to the community that we're trying to continue to encourage to build. And that is a great reason to have you back on when the book is done, because then you'll be able to piece together things and tell us how Cahill and this section fits into the bigger picture of the AFA. So if no one else has any other questions, maybe we won't have to drag out our full time to 90 minutes. But I think we've had a very full, effective time. So match time played up to this point. So thank you very much to Tom for this. And just as a reminder that the recording of this will be available on the SASH website and social media as soon as we can get it up there. And thank you so much. Please do follow our updates over the course of the next few weeks to see what's happening next. We should hopefully have a newsletter out as well in the early summer to inform you of our upcoming events in the fall. So thanks again. And Tom, brilliant to have you on, and all the best to everyone.